the United States of America. Land of the free, home of the brave, a country with a storied past that's made its way to the front of the world stage thanks to one thing and one thing only.
Meat.
Hello Internet, welcome to Food Theory on the Road, the show that's always saucy. And today, we're talking about the whole reason I wanted to do this miniseries to begin with, barbecue. This is it, folks. This is what made living out of my suitcase and not showering for 2 weeks worth it.
Wait. Hold on, pause the episode.
Where did you...
The fridge, duh.
Don't say that like it's normal.
Now, what did you just say?
I said that this is what made it all worth it.
No, the showering part. The suitcase part I get, that's fine. But why couldn't you shower?
Because... the road. Stop ruining this for me.
Ruining this for you? I have smelt your armpit, dude. I know that you need to shower. Did you at least, wash your legs?
Nobody does that. Don't you have an elsewhere to be?
Fine, but I'm disappointed in you because you didn't make a risk it to get the brisket joke to start the episode.
That's actually better. Like I was saying before I was rudely interrupted, she can't hear me. Barbecue is the whole reason I was so excited to do this road trip in the first place. It may not be the only or even the first place to do it, but nothing screams America like slathered barbecue sauce and ribs smoking. You may think I love it because it's delicious, and you wouldn't be wrong, but what really fascinates me is just how different the same concept is done in different regions in the country. States from California to the Carolinas have their own spin on it. And not only is the history of the country completely intertwined with barbecue, but the United States wouldn't be quite as united without it. Now, barbecue's roots go back to the very beginning of American history. It started as a technique for cooking food that originated from indigenous tribes in the Caribbean, specifically the Taino tribe. They would cook their meat over an indirect flame using green wood to keep the food and the wood used to assemble the barbecue from burning. Now, they would mainly use it to cook fish since that's what they had in large supply. So how did it get to the States and in meat form? Well, the answer is mostly Christopher Columbus. When he encountered the Caribbean islands, he saw this technique and was impressed, and he, along with the Spanish explorers with him, named this technique barbacoa, meaning a raised frame of sticks because of the structure they'd make to cook. But he wasn't the only one. Other European explorers also saw the fish being cooked over the open pits, and instead of heading to the south, they took it all the way up to New England. And so from the northeast and the South, barbecue began to take hold in the young country. Now, it's important to note here that despite the Europeans encountering this method, it was the enslaved African chefs that were the actual early pitmasters that developed barbecue and eventually spread it throughout the country. And the reason it got from smoking fish to the huge variety we see today comes down to the same reason the Caribbean tribes used fish. Barbecue really is just cooking whatever you got in spades. And in the early years of the US, that was pork. Pigs were in large supply in what is now North and South Carolina, and better yet, pigs were much lower maintenance than other livestock. Cows, for instance, are sort of like the divas of the farm world. They need a bunch of space and a bunch of food. Pigs, on the other hand, didn't really need large pens, and if supplies were low, they could just be sent into the forest to find food. And while smoking a pig was fine and dandy, the slow and low method sometimes led to dry pork, which is never fun to eat. So both North and South Carolina began adding a little sizzle to their barbecues, using sauces as a way to preserve the juices in the meat. And the different colonial immigrants thought of their own individual ideas to do so, leading to the iconic characteristics of Carolina barbecue. Something I got my own history lesson in when I caught up with a pitmaster in South Carolina.
The term Carolina barbecue is our sauce. It's the mustard-based, vinegar-based.
The two different bases came from the populations in the North and South. North Carolina, largely populated by the British, favored, with a U, a vinegar-based sauce since they loved that tart flavor. So using cider vinegar and peppers, they were able to achieve this sauce on their barbecued pork that is still used in North Carolina barbecue today. South Carolina was different. It was mostly populated by French and German immigrants, but they both had one spice/condiment in common. Mustard has been a part of German and French cuisine for a long time, going as far back as the Middle Ages. So mustard was a pretty natural duh when it came to what they chose for their barbecue. And it's the reason why South Carolina barbecue sauce is sometimes known as Carolina Gold. Now, I mentioned that Europeans also took the barbacoa idea up to the Northeast, but it didn't quite spike in popularity like it did in North Carolina's neighboring state, Tennessee. Like the Carolinas, Tennessee also used pork in their barbecues because of how abundant it was. But once again, the style of barbecue changed due to what they had at easy access. Memphis, Tennessee is right on the Mississippi River, and during the 1800s, they had access to goods being shipped in the Mississippi River trade. They had things like cotton, tobacco, and molasses. Using the sweet taste of the molasses, the early pitmasters added to the traditional sauces of the Carolinas and created a whole new sweet barbecue sauce to go on their pork. But Memphis did way more than just adapt the sauce. They introduced another way of flavoring their pig, the dry rub. A dry rub is when you rub seasoning and spices into a cut of meat, which flavors it when cooked. It wasn't initially used for flavoring, more like a byproduct of their effort to preserve their cuts of meat. In those days, preserving food was not as easy as we have it today with refrigerators and airtight packaging. They had to get a little more creative. The Europeans brought over their technique of preserving food using seasonings like salt. The salt would drain the meat and the bacteria in it of water content and prevent it from living and breeding, which could spoil the food. But as barbecue grew, people discovered it gave a nice taste to the meat, and sure enough, they started throwing in whatever spices they had access to see what flavors they could make. With their access to brown sugar, they started adding it to the dry rub, creating a sweet but crispy bark to the outer layer of the pork. So Memphis essentially created two styles of barbecue: a wet, sweet sauce, or a dry, crispy, but still sweet cut of meat. So we've covered the places in the states that are known for their pork, but as we move toward the central states, a new meat is introduced to the flames of barbecue: beef. Cows weren't indigenous to the new country. They were imported by Spanish explorers back in the late 1600s and were brought into what is now Texas. It was favorable to raise cattle there given its wide open space and grasslands for these large divas to roam and breed. So naturally, beef became the most popular protein over time. But it wasn't until the 1800s that modern Texan barbecue developed, when the German and Czech immigrants settled in. Like in the East, they brought over their fondness of smoking meats. What started out as a preservation method similar to the salt also left the cooked meat with a nice smoky flavor from the wood they used. But they didn't stop with just smoking the beef. They also added a simple dry rub to their cuts, typically brisket. Unlike our friends back in Memphis, Texans wanted to focus on enhancing the natural flavors of the beef, and so used a simple rub of salt and pepper that's also known as the Dalmatian rub. So when it comes to Texas style, it's all about the meat. A lesson I learned from another pitmaster in none other than Austin, Texas.
Here in Texas, beef is king. Just let that be known. That's why you're gonna see brisket, chopped beef. Barbecue's about using what you got.
Oh, and in case you're wondering about the meat you see cooking over that delicious oak wood fire, classic Texas brisket. Scrumptious, delicious, and another word that ends in -icious. But there's one final major region of barbecue left: Kansas City. How did this place define itself as one of the barbecue epicenters of the states? One of the big things it does differently is variety. Also known as the melting pot of barbecue, Kansas City uses all kinds of meats within their barbecues, and it all comes down to location and exploration. In 1871, once the railway system was in full swing, the Kansas City stockyards were established, where livestock like cows, pigs, sheep, and chickens could be kept in masses. Because of Kansas City's location near the railroads and the Missouri and Kansas rivers, it was an ideal place to trade livestock, and this gave Kansas City a wide variety of meat to choose from for their barbecue. So they used beef, pork, chicken, turkey, lamb, fish, you name it. This is one of the reasons it's known as a melting pot, incorporating many types of meat into the traditional barbecue style. But the way they cooked the barbecue was mostly the same as Memphis, using sweet, wet sauces, all thanks to a guy called Henry Perry. Henry Perry left Memphis in the early 1900s to Kansas City, setting up a barbecue joint. He brought with him the Memphis-style barbecue sauce, which is why it's still used in Kansas City today. So with the Carolinas, Memphis, Kansas City, and Texas, we've completed our exodia of American barbecue. And sure, there's plenty of other states that have their own spin, like California, but it's those four that developed alongside the country itself. And wouldn't you know it, there wouldn't be much of a country without barbecue. You see, once the forms of barbecue became cemented and popularized in all different areas of the country, the act of cooking and smoking meat wasn't just for regular old meals. It became an event. The low and slow method allowed people to gather for all sorts of things, like celebrations, holidays, and most importantly, political campaigns campaigns and debates. Andrew Jackson, a Tennessean, was the one who really sealed the deal in tying American politics to barbecue when he held the first one in the White House in 1829. And from there, barbecue was what joined the country together. And even when the country wasn't together, barbecue was there. Civil War, soldiers were sent off with barbecues. When the war ended, barbecues were held all over. When the emancipation of the slaves happened, the formerly enslaved people of the South celebrated with barbecues too, which was fitting since, like I mentioned earlier, the enslaved people were the ones who were the original pitmasters. And just like the country had helped define, barbecue kept evolving and reached its final form with the Industrial Revolution. Suddenly, sticks and pits in the ground were no longer needed, and people didn't have to spend hours and hours tending to meat thanks to the mass production of metal grills and stoves. It became less technique intensive because almost anybody could fire up a grill and slap some meat on that bad boy. And with that burst in mass production of metal, there was a huge uptick in meat grinders being used in factories across the country. Meat grinders that were used to make a particular popular style of beef that eventually became known as the hamburger. Not only that, but also ground the meat that was filling baseball parks in hot dogs. The final evolution of barbecue took it out of the hands of the incredibly skilled pitmasters and gave it to the general public, which allowed for barbecue to unite the country once again, but in a different way: the backyard barbecue. In the 20th century, the gas grill made it way easier for people to throw some patties onto the fire and cook up dinner for their entire block. Suddenly, the social aspect of barbecue came back in full swing, all to sell these newfangled grills. Companies took advantage of the fact that families started becoming obsessed with the televisions in their living rooms and started marketing their products as must-haves for families and friends celebrating holidays. Well, really just the one holiday, the 4th of July. And like that, barbecue became synonymous once again with the US, its politics, its history, and its pride. What started out in the young colonies as usually undercooked and tasteless pork ended up becoming what would define the country, with sauce, ribs, burgers, and grills. So there you have it, friends. Now you know how the history of the US is inextricably tied to meat. And no matter how you slice it, smoke it, or dry rub it, the country as it exists today wouldn't without barbecue. But hey, that's just a theory. A food theory. See you on the road.
Hey, it's me, former host MatPat, and I interrupt this video with a special announcement. I'm here to tell you I'm retiring. Again!
Didn't he already retire?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Did this guy already leave?
Oh, that's what I was thinking.
Oh, okay, let's hear him out.
And the answer is yes, but also no. You see, since leaving this channel, I've been over on GTLive having a grand old time being bad at video games and turning 1-minute videos into 90-minute theory fests. But now it's time for me to bow out of that channel as well, giving way to the new host, Ash, who, let's be honest, is way funnier than me anyway.
I feel like Judge Judy is the Ed Sheeran of, like, Americans over the age of 60.
No, finish. Judge Judy is the Ed Sheeran of
Americans over the age of 65.
amazing.
So this Saturday, October 26th at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern, 10 o'clock Pacific, we're having a big going away party live, and I want you to be there. Consider it an Eras tour for GTLive, where we're playing games and getting all nostalgic about the last decade of streaming. And most importantly of all, this whole thing is meant to benefit the Make-A-Wish Foundation, an organization that works to make the wildest dreams come true for children fighting the world's most critical illnesses. In fact, in the stream, we're raising money for their most urgent wishes, what are known as the rush wishes, the ones where sadly the children don't have that much time left. The reason this meant so much to me is that basically you all made my wishes come true thanks to this career on YouTube, and now as my final act, I'd like to pay it forward by making other people's wishes come true. Seemed like a really fitting note to go out on. And hey, if you want to start contributing now, as part of the charity event, we're actually having an auction of some old MatPat and GTLive memorabilia from over the years, with all the proceeds going to help those critically ill children to get their wishes granted. You can actually get your hands on some super rare one-of-a-kind items, like the morph suit that I wore from that edible underwear episode, the giant Gigachew that's hanging around our office, we have a signed copy of Undertale from yours truly, so you can own one along with the Pope, and even my signature red jacket. Yeah, the one that's been hanging up on set since my retirement video. One of a kind, signed by me. You'll see it live on the stream so you know it's real. Anyway, all those items and more are available right now for you to bid on all throughout this week up until the auction closes during the finale live stream. So if you're interested in contributing to an amazing charity and an amazing cause, or if you're interested in just getting some cool stuff, make sure you check out the link down in the description below, and be sure you're there this Saturday the 26th at 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 o'clock Pacific for one final video. A final video for you. See ya.